for me, like that's the thing that keeps my brain moving at night. Of all of these people, I mean, there's millions and millions of people that struggle with drug addiction, and so few that want to talk about it. And if technology and the internet gives people a medium to kind of express themselves, then I just want to be a part of it in whatever capacity that I can.
It's time for the SHAIR Recovery Podcast, where we bring you amazing life-changing success stories from addicts and alcoholics all over the world who share their inspiring journey in recovery. And now, here's your host,
On today's episode of the SHAIR Podcast, we have a special guest, Tim Stoddart, the founder of Sober Nation. Today, Tim takes us through his horrific battle with drugs and alcohol, his journey into recovery, and the story behind how he started Sober Nation. You don't want to miss this episode. But first, a message from our sponsor. Sober Nation is the largest online recovery community and treatment resource center. They provide treatment resources to those struggling with addiction, as well as to the family members who are caught in the crossfire. On top of that, Sober Nation is a huge community of good people who share their experience with each other. They have informative content, recovery and addiction news, as well as an entire clothing line which helps expand the culture of recovery. They can easily be found at www.sobernation.com. Sober Nation is putting recovery on the map. And if you're looking for more than just one recovery-related podcast, I've got two for you. The Recovery Elevator and That Sober Guy. On Mondays, you have Paul Churchill with the Recovery Elevator podcast. On Tuesdays, you have me, with the SHAIR Podcast. And on Fridays, you have Shane Raymer with the That Sober Guy podcast. Tune in every week and add us to your recovery portfolio. HP, baby. And after this interview, if you enjoyed listening to the SHAIR Podcast, please leave us a rating and review on iTunes or Stitcher Radio. This will ensure we get ranked well on these networks, and that means more people will easily find the SHAIR Podcast. This is the best way to show your support and help us grow. You can also find the SHAIR Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, YouTube. Go to any one of your favorite social networks, and the SHAIR Podcast will come right up. And finally, if you would like to make a donation to the SHAIR Podcast, you can do so using PayPal. On the top right corner of the website, you'll see a donate button. Just click on it, and this will take you to the page where you can make your donation. Thanks again for helping the SHAIR Podcast become a huge success. Now back to the show. Hey, Tim, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Excellent. How you feeling today?
I feel good. It's getting closer and closer to Friday. Thursdays are always kind of one of my favorite days because there's like that lingering of the Friday creeping up. So it's a good day.
Absolutely. I feel the same way, buddy. All right. So you ready to get started?
I'm ready. Let's do this.
All right. Let's do this. All right, folks. Today we have a special guest appearing on the SHAIR Podcast. Tim Stoddart, the founder of Sober Nation, the #1 national recovery resource and addiction treatment center database on the internet. On Facebook, Sober Nation has over 200,000 fans. It's incredible. So, Tim, let's dive right in. Tell us about how your life is today, your hobbies, exercise routine. Take us into your normal daily routine, including recovery. But more importantly, tell us about Sober Nation.
Well, thanks. Like I said, again, it's a pleasure to be here. It's kind of difficult to separate just my normal day with Sober Nation. So I guess it's kind of a good question because they're both pretty intertangled. I've found that the longer I stayed sober, that life works better when I have like a routine going. So I pretty much wake up at the same time every day. I get into my office. I hang out with my guys and we get lots of creative work done. And I spend most of my time on the Sober Nation site, which at this point, it's grown a lot. You know, we have, like you said, over 200,000 fans and the email list is growing and tons of content. And a majority of my time on the site is spent writing the content. Although it is a website, I'm not a coder, so I have to talk to my designer and my developer a lot to get some of that stuff done. But really, like, my connection with the site is the interaction with all the followers in the community. I write probably 90% of the content myself, and it takes a lot of time to do that. Like, a lot of people probably think that just writing blogs and coming up with stuff is pretty simple, but it really takes a lot of time, and I work really hard on it. And then, like when I leave here, you mentioned exercise. I exercise a lot. It's kind of my form of meditation to say, like if I go running or if I'm working out, it's a way for me to stay present and stay in the moment. And plus, it just makes me feel good. And then I'll come home and hang out with my dog, maybe watch TV or read a book for a little bit. And then it's back to the same thing the next day. So like I said, it's a very much a routine. But with that being said, there's still lots of spontaneity in my life, I guess you could say.
I hear you. Now, what about recovery? How about your meeting routines or sponsee, that kind of a thing? I know you're busy, but did you find time to squeeze that in there?
Yeah, of course. It's definitely not like it used to be when I first came around, but every Tuesday is something that I make sure I get to. I talk to my sponsor every Tuesday. We go get coffee, we go hit our meeting. And then usually there's another one or two in there in the week, sometimes more, sometimes less. But on Tuesday's sort of my day where no matter what's happening, it's like, look, this is my priority. I got to talk to my sponsor. And then sponsors was always something that's really important. I actually just had a new guy approach me yesterday when I spoke at that meeting. So it looks like I'll, be on a new adventure with another guy over the next couple months, which I'm looking forward to, man. He was actually speaking in the meeting, and even while he was speaking, I was thinking to myself, like, I can relate to this guy. I can help him. And then right afterwards, he sort of just came up and asked if I would help him out. And of course, I said, yeah.
Perfect. That's how we do it. So, Tim, how do you maintain your spiritual condition, that conscious contact with a higher power?
It's an interesting question because it's one of those things where I've just sort of had my own experience, and when somebody actually asks you how to do it, you don't know. It's funny, you don't have like the words. One thing that I do, I'm definitely not the most godly spiritual person, but I've always prayed at night. I don't really understand it. I don't try to understand it. It's just how I go to bed. It's just like the last thing I do, and kind of check myself and talk to my higher power for a little bit and just sort of get back on the same page with him. And then, of course, it's important. Like every time I say a prayer, I always mention, how grateful I am, because my gratitude is definitely off the charts for being able to live my life this kind of way. More so, I think that the biggest thing for me, and like I said, I don't know exactly how to explain this, but it's just being present. Like even when I drive to work or when I drive home or when I'm driving around, just understanding and knowing in my heart that there's things going on that are bigger than me that I have to stay connected to. Like that's kind of what my higher power is. It's like that connectedness between people and things and energy. Like when I feel connected to that and I feel tapped in to all what's going on around me in the universe, like that's when life is really firing for me. So it's more just being aware. I don't really have too many rituals. I don't go to church. I talk about it with my friends and my sponsor, of course, but for me, it's just like that maintenance of understanding that you're connected to something.
That's awesome, man. This is the first time I'm asking that question on an interview, because I think it's so...
Get out of here. So I'm your guinea pig.
Yeah, dude, totally. And as you're telling your answer, I'm like, I'm so glad I threw this question in, because it's a wonderful answer. I start thinking about, what my routine is, or, how I maintain that spiritual condition. A lot of guys talk about they get up in the morning, they do their meditation, they read their reading, they do this, they do that. And I'm like, God, I don't do that as often as I should. But every night when I go to bed and I get into bed and I get in with my wife and I'm, she's usually asleep before I get to bed. I get into bed and I see her across from me and I think to myself, God, I'm so grateful. Like my life is so good. And then boom, I just start talking to God, And so I start thinking about, I think many of us do. Like many of us have that at the end of the day. If we haven't done anything else to stay connected, then we at least, when our head hits the pillow, all of a sudden it's just like, God, I'm so grateful to be alive and to be clean today. So, man, great answer. Thank you. I'm pumped. I'm excited I threw that question in.
Well, I appreciate it because I was going through it sort of thinking to myself, like, I don't know how to explain this. So I'm glad that it came across as cohesive, to say the least.
I get it. I know the listeners are going to get it for sure. We're all the same tribe, man. So, Tim, how much clean time do you have and when's your anniversary date?
My sobriety date is March 4th, 2010. So 5.5 years, but almost exactly, I think. I'm not that good at math, so I can't do it in my head, but it's definitely right around 5.5 years. My original date was September 30th. I had a small relapse a couple of months in, and I only mentioned that, not that, I'm sure relapse is a part of a lot of people's stories, but I actually kept it a secret from people for a long time. And for like a year and a half, I kept playing off like September 30th was still my original date. And if anybody hears this and they're kind of experiencing that, like, I just remember that feeling of it eating and sort of eating away at me. So it was important for me to sort of get honest with myself and people around me. And then once I did that, I remember thinking, like, this really is not as big a deal as I thought it was. It's just what it is,
Absolutely. No, dude, that's beautiful. And I've had a couple of interviewees that said the same thing. They're like, well, my original date was this, but I had a relapse, and they did the same thing. They were coming in, and it's unbelievable how it just eats away with you. For me, I had 2 weeks, and I was claiming 2 weeks, and I kept coming in. I'm like, yeah, today I got 14 days. Today I got this. And I just remember one day I walked into the meeting. I said, I'm dirty. It was just like that. Where everybody's like, whoa. But it was eating. And then when I was done, it was like, why the fuck was I just holding on to that? Like, seriously, who cares? Right? And
it's really just not that big a deal, right?
Well, at the end of the day, it's the ego, and for those listening, you get that ego that's just telling you, oh, we can't come clean, you're fine, right? But ultimately, if you don't, you're going to go back out. I'm convinced of that. That eating away, the guilt factor is just horrible. So anyway, good stuff.
Yeah, it was
man.
not fun.
No, it never is. All right, dude, we're warmed up, man. It's time for me to turn this show over to you, Tim. It's time for you to share your story, the battle against drugs and alcohol, the wreckage it caused in your life, when you hit rock bottom, and finally your journey into recovery today. And then you can tell us all about Sober Nation when you came to get clean. So get going. Let's get started.
Yeah, sounds great, man. I had kind of a deja vu because when I was speaking last night, I remember saying the same thing, that when I first used to talk to people, I was always so excited to sort of tell my story because I thought that I had like this really unique experience. And I guess the longer time goes on, I find that my experience is, although unique, is pretty much the same as everyone else's, in the sense that no matter where you come from or who you are, eventually just the drugs and the alcohol, they win, and I just couldn't do it anymore. So a little bit about me, though. I was born in Philadelphia. I was born in a little town called Chestnut Hill. My family was really cool. Like, we have a really close family. I guess we were probably like lower middle class. I don't remember ever being hungry, but I remember my parents working a lot and working really, really hard. But I've heard when people speak in meetings sometimes about that, like, I never felt loved. I didn't feel that way. Like, I knew my parents and my family really loved me. I always felt a lot of love as a kid. Just had that thing where I just felt uncomfortable a lot, like speaking to people. If I spoke to someone, I would get self-conscious about it. And so then said to myself, next time I'm just going to be quiet. And then I would be like the quiet kid in the corner and think to myself, like, great, now I'm even more uncomfortable. I wonder if everyone's looking at me. Stuff like that, like, just had a real hard time getting comfortable. So I had like I did a lot, but I spent a lot of time by myself. Like, I would skateboard by myself a lot. I would go running a lot. I played a lot of sports, hung out with my dog. There's a park in Philadelphia called Fairmount Park that I would go to a lot. The point I'm trying to make is I spent a lot of time like in my own head with my own thoughts, and never really got to that point where I felt comfortable just expressing myself or opening up to people. Until, like, I started drinking pretty early and smoking pot, but when I hit the opiates was really when, it sort of takes a hold of you. Like, I was always a real experimental person. I still kind of am. I like sort of adrenaline and excitement. Like, I love concerts. I love mosh pits and all that stuff. So I was always really attracted to that sort of lifestyle. But obviously, for the people listening that have experience with opiates, like, there's a different sort of obsession that comes along with them because it's so physical, and your body just wants it so bad that it really took over. And there's times I'm kind of grateful for that because I've seen people with drinking problems sort of just meander with their drinking problem for decades and decades and decades, but usually if people get stuck on opiates, you learn pretty quickly that like, okay, this is either going to kill me or I need to get some help. There's no real middle ground. So in a way, I was always kind of grateful for it because at least it brought me to my bottom faster than it maybe could have if, I was heavier into some other things. And then speaking about my bottom, I think it's an important story that I always sort of mention because my mother got really sick. She had some kind of issue with her brain, and we had to fly out to California for like an emergency surgery. And I was really, really sick at the time. And even the plane ride over there, I remember just having awful withdrawals. I had to fly from Philly to Phoenix and then Phoenix to, I guess it was probably San Francisco or whatever airport is around Stanford University. That's where her surgery was.
Okay.
And when I first got there, my mom had like a pre-op appointment where she was going to talk to the surgeon. And I think they were going to hold like a model of like her brain and stuff. And, when I say model, like a little plastic model that you hold in your hand and sort of like explain the procedure a little bit.
Okay.
And she just asked if I wanted to go with her. She was real sick. Like she couldn't walk. Her body wasn't working right. She was in a wheelchair, and she asked if I wanted to go to her. And I just said no because I was so sick. And, I had been waiting. I stashed some stuff with me, and I was sort of waiting to get alone for a couple of minutes just because I needed to get rid of the withdrawals, And
right.
Then she left, and then I did. And, I sort of did my thing, and I felt that, like, ease and comfort come over me. And then I remember just looking out this window in the middle of California being like, damn, like, this is my mother. Like, she raised me on very little resources and worked so hard her whole life and did her best. And I'm her firstborn. It's me and my sister. I'm the first, and, I'm her son. And it just really hit me. And I just think that's interesting because when people talk about bottoms, like I've been thrown in jail a couple of times and got jumped and got my ass kicked a few times and stuff like that. But none of that really frightened me. It was that moment where there weren't necessarily consequences in the form of like jail time or physical harm or stuff like that. It was the consequences like, wow, like I'm losing my family. And, that was it. I wish I could say that I stopped right then. I went home. I had a carpentry business. I think we all kind of had like this unspoken agreement. They're like, look, let me finish this job I'm working on. I was building a fence for some guy. And as I was finishing, like my dad and my uncle kind of asked to come over, and there was a soccer game on. And I said, yeah, it's a good idea. I guess we all need to talk. And it wasn't even really like a fight. It was more so just everybody just knew that I was sick. And that was it. That was like the start of my journey. The next day I went to the treatment center outside of Philadelphia in, I think it was called Newtown. And that's where it started, man. It's been my life ever since.
So how old were you the first time you did opiates?
19, 20, I guess it probably was.
Okay. And so prior to that?
Yeah, I was about 19.
Okay, so 19, 20. What was the first thing you did? Like how old were you the first time you did drugs or alcohol?
I'll never forget. I was somewhere 7th grade, in between 7th grade and 8th grade. So I guess I was 13. There was this little trestle that we used to hang out at in this town called Orland where I grew up. And there's this place called The Bridge. It was like an old trestle track that was kind of in the woods. And we used to hang out there. And that was the first time I really gave it a go. I was just smoking pot. And I remember the feeling really well, though. I definitely remember something like expanding for me that day.
And so that was that first feeling of, I guess, that euphoric sort of feeling of I found something new here that, I've been missing my whole life kind of thing?
Yeah, that's definitely a way to put it. All of it, sure. Like anything that would just get me out of myself. I know you hear that a lot. When I remember hearing that for the first time, that was the best way to describe it. Like I just did not like being still with myself. So it was anything. I mean, I'm really, whatever can just get me out of myself, I would take. And that experience, sure, I remember I was with one of my best friends at the time and walking home from it and, just having the giggles and stuff and looking at him and thinking like, wow, like I think I found something.
Oh, yeah.
And I did, because at that point, smoking pot was really I know I'm sober and everything, but like I don't really think smoking pot's a big deal. I don't do it, but if other people do. So that was sort of the first little taste, but that was just the start. Like as soon as I went there, I was just excited to try new things and see what else was out there, which eventually led me to, where it did.
So what kind of consequences did you face? Because in the beginning, you do the opiates, and I've never done opiates. So, I was always a cocaine guy myself. So I always like to be way up high. So I never understood the whole being way down low kind of experience. But, I've seen a lot of the guys that come into the rooms beat up from the opiate abuse, especially the intravenous use. At the beginning, I'm sure it was amazing, but then it quickly turns on you, right? So what are some of the consequences that you faced, jumping into opiates?
And believe it or not, I'm actually really similar to you. I was way more into uppers, and I never really got that down, depressed feeling from it. It would get me really fired up. Like I think I did Xanax like once or twice, and both times I kind of just fell asleep, and I remember thinking like that sucked, It just wasn't my thing. I liked being excited. So obviously with that kind of lifestyle, I would just find trouble somehow. Even if I wasn't looking for it, I would just find it. I was pretty lucky. Like I never did anything that would warrant real consequences. But sure, I couldn't go a month without getting thrown in jail for a night or just something like some kind of citation or getting pulled over. I was always paying fines and just big inconveniences. The real consequences were probably physical, though. I've always been a pretty skinny kid. I was like really, really underweight. I would have these headaches every day, I think just because I was so malnourished and probably not drinking enough fluids. And the headaches I remember really well. And then the emotional stuff too, because I was not happy. Like as soon as I would wake up in the morning, my first thought would always be like, like this again. But sure. And then the family stuff really, like I know I bring that up a lot. My family is just so close. Like my sister kind of walked in on me putting some shit up my nose once that really filled me with shame and guilt. All of that, like I just lost the relationships that I had. It really ate me up at all the things that was the biggest consequence for me, because my family kind of is and always was everything. My aunts and uncles and my grandparents, like we were all just so close, and I really, really felt like I was losing that. Eventually I did, but not to the extent where they stopped caring about me, because it was them that sort of gave me that first little boost. It was like, look, buddy, like you're better than this. You can do this. And I did. So I'm just really grateful for them.
Again, how old were you the first time you used drugs?
Probably 13, I guess, maybe 12, 13, in between 7th and 8th grade, in between the summer. So I don't know exactly how old I was, but I'd have to say 13.
Okay. And how old were you when you stopped?
23.
Oh, so 10-year run.
Yeah, that's it. I've been sober more than half as long as I got high, which is pretty interesting.
That is. It is. And that first 5 years, I remember when I got my first 5 years, a lot of amazing things started to happen in my life. They say that you get your head out of your ass after 5 years. So they give you your marbles back so you can play with them again. So it's exciting what's unfolding. But what's more amazing is that from there and from, that horrible bottom, wanting to be there for your mother and not being able to because the addiction was so overpowering and it had taken over, and then your family intervening and coming to the rescue, so to speak. So tell us about that next step. Tell us about what happened afterwards. You went to rehab and then segue into your journey into recovery and then ultimately into Sober Nation.
Yeah. So when I left treatment, I went back to my mother's place for a little bit. She was living in a neighborhood called Germantown. And even just being there, I think it was like 4 or 5 days in, I just started getting really, really squirrely. Just walking down the streets and seeing people, I just knew that I couldn't stay there. So I called my counselor at treatment. I was like, look, man, like, is there anywhere else for me to go? He's like, are you really serious about this? It's like, yeah, I think I am. I said, yes, I'm serious, but I think in my heart, like anybody else, I was still probably apprehensive just because I didn't know what living a sober life was all about, So I was like, yeah, I think I'm serious. I don't want to get high.
I know the feeling.
Yeah, so that's honestly how I got to Florida. Like, I didn't have any plans to come here. It was completely on a whim. I called him. He said, all right, I know a guy in Florida. And then I had a cousin that lived down here, so I called him. I was like, hey, look, I know I haven't spoken to you in like 10 years. I'm thinking about doing this thing. And it turns out that he was an NA guy.
Awesome.
So I think at the time he'd been clean like 3 or 4 years. And I don't know, man. Even looking back at it, sometimes I wonder what I was thinking. I wasn't really thinking a whole lot. I just did it before I could think about it. I packed some stuff. I had a work van with my carpentry business. I sold it. So I have a dog, and I sold my van so I could pay somebody to watch my dog for like a month or two while I figured some stuff out. And I just went, I had like $40-something, and I stayed on my cousin's couch for a week or two. And then I went right into like a sober living facility, and it was actually a really good experience. I made some good friends there. I got a job. I would come home from work and play basketball every day, and just learned all that stuff that you don't know how to do, because I was having a carpentry business where I was making decent money, and then all of a sudden I was doing carpentry for like $8 an hour. But you're just learning how to manage your time and your life and your money and just the standard stuff, waking up on time, getting to places that you say you're going to go, keeping your word when you talk to people. So the whole first 6 months was kind of a blur, but definitely a good experience, man, because I learned how to do all that stuff and interact with people. And the basketball games, when I would come home from work, I know it sounds like it's just basketball, but that was really, really important for me to like get to know some people and have fun and find a new release that I could run around and get some endorphins going and laugh with people that I just met. And actually, I would catch myself like smiling and think like, wow, like this feels good, like I can do this. And then from there, it's been, I don't want to bore everybody with the whole 5-year story, but it's just been like a real progressive learning experience, because every day you learn something new. And I always appreciate when things kind of take time, because for me, and I think for a lot of addicts in general, there's that like impulsive, impatient aspect. And when things take time and then you look back at like the last couple of years and you see like the journey and the progression of how everything turned out, like it always makes sense. And that's really how it's been. Like, it's just been a slow chipping away at things, chipping away at some of my goals and dreams. And it's fun. Like, it's great. I really enjoy it.
You were in the sober living house, right? And so for there, were you going to NA meetings, AA meetings? What was your recovery of choice?
At the time, it was kind of both. My sponsor was AA. I knew that I liked what this guy was saying. I got clean through the AA steps. I went through the big book. But my cousin was an NA guy. I would go to a candlelight meeting with him every Friday, and I really enjoyed that. Even till this day, I don't necessarily have a preference. It was really just more so that my sponsor knew how to take somebody through the AA steps, and I knew that he was the guy I wanted to sponsor me. So I said, yeah, let's do that. Like, if he was an NA guy, I probably would have done it through NA. It's really all the same to me. I don't see that much of a difference between the two. Drug's a drug, and no matter what you call it or the terminology or any of that, it's really all saying the same thing. Kind of a combination of both,
Absolutely. I'm an NAAA guy myself, and the guys that I got clean with, they're some NA Nazis, man. Hardcore guys. If you say sober in a room, they'll have like a small anxiety attack, right? So,
sure.
And I've always been like a rebel. I'm not a conformist, right? I always push against the seams, so to speak, right? And I remember one time, I said to somebody, and I was on a rant. I said, well, okay, NAAA, well, let me ask you a question. When you're in one of those meetings, where is God? Is God in AA or is God in NA? And that look of bewilderment was just the answer I needed. I go,
I never thought about it like that.
It doesn't fucking matter, man.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? God is everywhere. All right. And I'm connecting with my higher power. So I need to be in a room where other people are talking about the solution. All right. And anytime I go to a room where they're talking about the solution, there's God. For me, it's always been like that whole, you just got to find it where you find it. And I live in Costa Rica. So when I was in California, there's like 1,000 meetings just in LA, thousands of meetings in LA, right? I can go to anywhere I want to go, right?
Of course.
But over here,
it's very much like South Florida too.
Yeah. Oh, I celebrated my 5-year anniversary in Florida at a candlelight meeting.
That's cool.
You know, I don't even remember where it was, but I just remember it was one of the most impactful times in my life. So for me, it's like, dude, if it's AA, NA, I don't care. I'm looking for God. I'm looking for a higher power, and I'm looking to connect with people that, you know.
I totally get what you're saying.
You know
like
what I'm
sometimes
saying?
even when you hear people go back and forth about it, like you think about kind of chiming in, but then at the same time you think like, is this even worth it? Because it's such a pointless debate, you know?
It is.
Like, why do people care so much if it's AA or NA or if you're clean or you're sober? I don't know, man. I've always just had a mindset like that. Like, is this really what we're arguing about? Like, who gives a shit?
100%, man. As long as I'm not putting a drug in my body, then it's all good, man.
Yeah, I'm with you, buddy.
All right, 100%. Excellent. So the question I want to know, man, is I want to know about Sober Nation. So at what point in your recovery, you got 5 years now, you know, how much time did you have before you're like, dude, I've got this idea?
Well, you know what? It would be very arrogant of me to say that the whole idea was mine. It was sort of an effort between me and a friend of mine. And I'll tell you how it started because it's actually kind of a cool story. I guess probably like 9 months or so in, I've always been a writer. Like I was saying, I write all the content and like it's just something that I would do to sort of clear my head. And even in this podcast, like I'm always a little self-conscious about how it comes out because I've had a difficult time expressing myself like verbally throughout my life. But when I could sit down and like put words on a page, I could always get my thoughts out clear. So it's just something that I enjoyed doing. And then at the same time, a really good friend of mine was working where he was selling advertising to just business owners and local communities. And then they would put these ads at country clubs, right? So the people that were golfing could look through the ads and maybe call the businesses that were advertising. And he would find these country clubs through a website. So I had been sort of starting this blog that I was getting a little bit of traction on, and I was learning about writing on the internet and the things that people respond to. And he sort of had this idea of like this sort of directory type thing. And then he told me about it, and then I told him about it. And I was like, why don't we just combine the two? He wanted to make a directory that was for resources and treatment centers for people that were looking for help. I was like, yeah, and you know what? I've been thinking about building this like social platform for people that are just in recovery or that need help, and everybody can sort of share their ideas that isn't so connected to not necessarily a 12-step thing, because I think a lot of people do use the 12 steps, but something that's just a little less formal, you know, where you don't have to be, you can just have an idea, or just have an open forum or whatever. And that's really how it started. Like the two of us just kind of came together, you know. Since then, with life, and then of course you have to pay the bills and people have different opinions on things. We've gone our separate ways, and it's all good. I still talk to him today, but that's really how the whole concept started. But, you know, the funny thing is, like, there's always a vision that you have, but the end result is never necessarily what you think of. The whole thing has, like, evolved, and I've sort of been flexible, and you react to things that people say that they want, and then you try some other things that you think are going to work great, and they end up not working at all and completely bombing. So it's really just been a whole push, pull, bend, back and forth of just this community of people that are all excited and passionate about recovery.
I love it, man. It's beautiful. What year did this start?
I guess it had to have been 2011, maybe 2012. I remember exactly where we were when we first talked about the idea, but you know what? I can't remember exactly what the time was. It's been 4.5 years, so something around there.
Wow, man. So it's amazing. And what's funny is that, you know, they tell you about, you know, not making any big decisions or making any big projects.
Fuck that, man. I went for it. I just went for it.
Well, it's funny because I've talked to guys that have done projects like this very early on in recovery, and it's what's kept them clean, man.
Well, Paul, he's actually turned into a really good friend of mine, Paul from Recovery Elevator, that he was one of your guests. I don't know if he was your last guest or a couple before, but he's definitely said that Recovery Elevator has been like a huge accountability aspect for him, because he knows that he's got to do it every week, and his people are listening. And, you know, if he goes back out, then he lets them all down. I totally understand that. I'd be lying if I said that there aren't times where sometimes like those little thoughts kind of dwindle in your head, maybe just one, or maybe I could just take a few hits or something. But Sober Nation always pops up when I start thinking that stuff. Like, I'd be such a hypocrite, you know?
Oh, man. It's 100% true. All of us that are in recovery and doing some sort of, I guess, public service to a certain degree, right? I mean, I've got to get this podcast out every Tuesday. And so, I mean, I just celebrated 12 years this year. So staying clean and sober after 12 years is not so difficult as long as you're maintaining a spiritual condition, right? Like I do have a very rigorous recovery routine, and I always have since I got sober because, it was so tough to get clean. But at the same time, any other character defects, like, oh man, I don't feel like doing this. Like there's certain times where I don't feel like doing something. Oh God, I don't know. I was supposed to go to the gym today. I'll fucking sleep in, man. Like I'm not going to the gym today. I'm not doing it. Or, I really shouldn't be eating this thing, and fuck it. I want to eat this thing right now. Right. And so there's certain things in my life where I recognize where I won't complete my mission, so to speak, right?
Absolutely.
But with this podcast, I feel like there's people waiting every Tuesday for this podcast. I get emails from people. I can tell by my downloads. Tuesday comes up and it's just boom, I get this spike, right, of downloads. I go, wow, like
it's really cool.
I have an obligation, right? So I get it, but it really helps with the accountability. And it's a double-edged sword, but I do enjoy it. I do enjoy holding myself accountable by this podcast. So I get it, man. It's very, very cool. What we're doing is we're doing service.
I completely agree, man. Like just overdoing it for so long, like you can't please everybody. And, of course you get like the Facebook message that says you shouldn't have your name on this stuff, or this is all real private. And I get that, but for every message that I have from those people, I'll get 10, 15, 20. I get these pictures every day of people sharing their sobriety dates. And all I do is repost them. Like I'm hardly even doing anything. And they're just so grateful and they're so happy. And it makes their day that their picture goes out on the internet with their sobriety date, and they get these hundreds and sometimes thousands of people commenting on them saying like, congratulations, you look so much better. Like it keeps getting better for them. And I just know that what I'm doing is having a good impact, like a cultural impact, especially with young people, people, I guess millennials probably that are the most internet savvy are the ones that are the biggest demographic, and they just appreciate it so much. And I really feel like what I'm doing is building like a culture of recovery, so to speak, because so much of what people see in the media with like TV is shows like Intervention, or Jersey Shore was another one where it's addiction and it's partying. And there's so few media outlets that show recovery and what can happen to people when they get some recovery and turn their lives around, and the amazing transformation that they can make in their lives. And so I feel really obligated to show that, because not a lot of people see it. Even till this day, people bring up the word addiction. And what's the first thought that you think people have when they say addiction or drugs or heroin or the standard like stigmas?
Yeah.
But then if you bring up the word recovery, nobody even really knows what that means. I guess everybody kind of knows somebody, but even that person may or may not talk about it too much. So I really feel like what I'm doing, and I say what I'm doing, really it's the community. Like I just keep everything together. It's the people of the Sober Nation community that do this all. Like they're the ones sharing the information. They're the ones congratulating each other and reading this stuff and expressing their own opinions on it. So you're absolutely right. Like the accountability I have towards this thing is huge. I mean, it's almost my life. It's what I do with the majority of my time.
I love it, man. It's absolutely beautiful. And, you mentioned Intervention. I hate that show.
Yeah, it drives me nuts because it's just everybody's seeing it, just train wrecks, Yes. And I feel so bad for these poor kids that if you wanted to videotape me while I was like dope sick and shit, like I'd be humiliated. And I get what they're doing. It's a TV show and they need ratings. And, I'd be lying if I said I never watched it. But I think after I watched it like 2 or 3 times, I was just like, I can't get behind this. Like, I can't watch this show because that's not what it should be about. Like, you shouldn't be glamorizing or giving attention to the pain that addiction causes. Because you notice like half of it is all about people crying and how traumatic it is and kind of sensationalized. And then the recovery aspect of it is like 30 seconds long. They say, oh, yeah, like I just completed 3 months of treatment. I feel great. And then cut the credits. You know, like, where's the rest of this person's life? Where's all the amazing things that they've done since they got clean? They never show that part of it, and it drives me crazy.
Oh, man, that's exactly how I feel. As a matter of fact, I had a lady, she is the mother of an addict. She sent me an email, and she's like, hey, I love your show. Thanks so much. Quick question. I heard you say that you hate Intervention, the show Intervention. Why is that? And I told her exactly what you just said. I said, you know what? You have a show where you have a bunch of people that are using drugs. The majority of this entire show is the person being sick, using drugs. One of the people that I interviewed shared that while he was watching Intervention, he got an idea of how to use his drug more effectively. All right? So instead of helping him get sober, it actually pushed him further into his disease. And for me, I hadn't been able to finish an episode because it bothered me so much. But after I got her email, I said, before I respond to this email, I'm going to actually finish an entire episode, okay? I finished the episode, and I go, there's 30 seconds here of the guy, I've got 3 months clean now, and here's my books, and, you know, join us on the next episode. And I'm like, this is horrible.
Yeah,
you know,
I'm absolutely with you.
That was perfect. Okay, so we're on exactly the same page. I mean, where is the recovery? Like, where is the happy ending? Because, you know, the reality is Hollywood, most of the movies are all, you know, you go, oh, wow, it's a happy ending. Well, so's recovery. There are happy endings. 1 out of 10 of us has a really great happy ending, and our lives are just amazing. You know, and who knows? Maybe they'll have some show eventually that'll glorify recovery. I'd love to be a part of that.
Yeah, they should. Like, I know that we're kind of going back and forth here. I think it's really cool. I'm always just coming up with cool ideas of things I'd like to create. And I always thought that whoever had the balls to really make a reality show out of that would do well. Granted, I hope they don't do it because we know reality shows aren't really reality shows. It's still scripted and the same thing. But just that whole concept of, instead of taking a group of young people and following them around and seeing what kind of trouble they come up with, like, why don't you see what kind of stuff they create? Why don't you see what kind of positive things they're doing in their lives? Why don't you see who they help and the lives that they can change? There's nothing like that. And so a conversation started because we were going about accountability with, like, what this means to us and having to be there. And that's really what it is for me. Like, that's the thing that keeps my brain moving at night, of all of these people. I mean, there's millions and millions of people that struggle with drug addiction, and so few that want to talk about it. And if technology and the internet gives people a medium to kind of express themselves, then I just want to be a part of it in whatever capacity that I can.
Amen, brother. I'm in. All right, Tim, this has been awesome, dude. This has been really, really a lot of fun. So what we're going to do is we're going to close up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you 5 questions. This is for the newcomer, all right? So I'm going to ask you 5 questions about your early recovery, and I want you to answer with inspiring and insightful answers you can share with our newcomers. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, number 1. What was keeping you from getting clean or staying clean when you first got introduced to recovery?
My answer is not that cool. I was really afraid to be bored. I was honestly my biggest fear. I just didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I just thought my life was going to be super boring. So if you are like me and you're worried about that, don't be, because my life's 10 times more exciting now that I don't get high, because I have freedom to do whatever I want. Like, when I leave work today, I'm going to a concert in Miami with my friend, and, like, you can just do that stuff because there's nothing hanging over you. So the answer is boredom. I was really, really terrified that I was going to be bored for the rest of my life.
There are plenty, brother. You are not alone. Most of us think, what am I going to do now?
Yeah, it just didn't make sense to me.
All right, number 2. At what point did you have a spiritual awakening, that aha moment in recovery when you accepted that you were powerless over drugs and alcohol, but for the first time had developed the hope that you could recover?
For me, it was after I did the 6th and 7th step, because in the book, it's really only like 2 paragraphs, but my sponsor took me through the 12 and 12, and it really dove into it, and it really opened my eyes as to the kind of man that I wanted to be and who I aspired to, and that I was able to be confident without being arrogant, and it was possible for me to love myself without telling everybody how great I was. That was really just sort of that moment where it just sort of clicked for me, where I said, like, you know what, I get this a little bit. And that was really the moment where the obsession lifted for me. Like, I remember having a roommate that said, it was after he did the third step prayer and it was just gone. And I did the third step prayer and I just kind of felt sort of silly, you know, I didn't like, like nothing happened. But it was after that where like I really got to dive in and analyze myself. From that moment on, I've never had that real urge. Like, of course, you have those thoughts every now and then, but I've never had that like, oh, I just want to drink so bad right now.
I got you. Perfect. Number 3, do you have a favorite book you would recommend to a newcomer that you read in early recovery?
A book that I read in early recovery that really changed a lot about how I think is by Napoleon Hill, and it's called Think and Grow Rich. And he uses the term rich very broadly. It's sort of whatever your definition of rich is. But that book really had a huge impact on me, almost as much as the big book did, maybe even the same. It's a really deep book. It's in common English, though, so it's kind of an easy read. But after I read that, it just completely changed my life. He talks about higher power as like infinite intelligence, that the universe is so big and it's really impossible for us to understand everything, and that's okay, you know. But like I was saying before, like tapping into that infinite intelligence is what spirituality is sort of about. And after I read that, I really understood myself a lot better.
That's in the SHAIR Podcast recommended book list. It's one of my recommended books. It's one of my favorites. I've read it at least 3 times. I have it on Audible. Absolutely love that book. It's one of the first books I read. I read Think and Grow Rich and The Alchemist when I first got sober. And
that's so funny. Me too. By Paulo Coelho.
Dude, I've read that one like 3 times. I love it. I always get something new out of it. You know what I mean?
Every time, yeah. It's a great book. Well, what does he call it in that book?
Your personal legend.
Yeah, there you go. Your personal legend. That's it.
Yeah. Your only mission in life is to find your personal legend, you know? And for me, it was the SHAIR Podcast. I remember when I made the decision that I was going to do this, it was like I had a white light moment that was so big, right? Mm-hmm. That, buddy, I was like, within a month, I had a logo done, website done, content, interview format. It was like crazy, right? It was just craziness.
Right, because all that stuff that they talk about in those books, where when you combine like desire and faith and sort of get out of your own way, like shit just starts happening for you. And it's really difficult to explain because it's not always us that's doing it. Like the energy all around just conforms to make these things happen when you align yourself with that in your life. That those books just really put those kind of concepts that are really hard for me to explain. I find every time I talk about it, I say like and a lot, so I usually just stop. But after reading it, I got what they were trying to say, and it just, ever since then, life's been so, I don't want to say it's not stressful, but it's been way less stressful because I know that I'm just going in the right direction.
The whole universe conspires to help you achieve your personal legend.
There it is.
I got that thing in there, buddy. I love that book.
Me too.
All right. So, Tim, what is the best suggestion you have ever received?
Make it to midnight. It's like...
Dude, I love it. It's first time.
It just clicks for me. I have a lot of tattoos, and I got that one tattooed on me because it's so much bigger than just AA at the same time. No matter what's going on in your life, just make it to midnight. You know, you don't have to think about tomorrow or the next day or 5 years from now. You don't have to worry about what you're going to do at that wedding that you want to drink at in 8 years. You don't have to worry about all that shit. You just have to stay in the moment, just shoot for midnight and then fall asleep. And then when you wake up, shoot for midnight again. And then eventually just the days really stack up, and it's just the best advice I ever got. I really live my life that way.
It's beautiful, man. I love it. And number 5, if you could give a newcomer only one suggestion, what would it be?
I think it would probably be the same thing, is stay in the moment. It's so easy. I find that fear is really based on things that are in the future or they're in the past. And if you're just completely present in the moment, there's not really too much to be afraid of because we're all just things are just going. They're just moving. Like, I'm breathing, I'm alive. Anytime I get full of fear, it's usually because I'm thinking of something in the future or I'm thinking of something in the past. And most of the time, that stuff's not even real anyway. So it's really easy to say. It's really hard to do, especially when you're first coming around. But just try your best to stay present and to not worry about 2 weeks from now and a month from now. It's the best thing that you can do. It keeps you from getting anxiety attacks.
Beautiful. I love it. So, Tim, tell us the best way for us to find you, to find Sober Nation. What are your websites? How do people get in touch with you?
Yeah, the website is just sobernation.com. We actually just launched an online clothing company as well. It's just recovery-inspired T-shirt designs, and that's shop.sobernation.com. I'm really transparent on my website. Anybody can email me directly. It's just tim@sobernation.com. And then, of course, we got the Facebook, the Twitter, the Pinterest, all that stuff. But if you want to get involved, you just email me. I'm a personable guy. I talk to everybody sort of like they're my friends if anybody wants to contact me. So if you want to get in touch, it's just Tim, Tim, @sobernation.com.
I love it, man. All right, Tim, we have now reached the end of our show. Thanks for joining us. And as we say here in Costa Rica, pura vida.
Pura vida.
Thank you for joining us on the SHAIR Recovery Podcast. To check out the show notes page on this interview or to thank our guests for sharing their story, go to www.theshairpodcast.com. While you're on the website, don't forget to sign up for our free newsletter to stay up to date on the latest news, podcasts, and interviews. Want to be one of our guests and share your story? Then go to our website and click on the Share Your Story button. We share our inspiring recovery stories every Tuesday, so subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher Radio to get your free weekly download. We'll see you then. The opinions shared on this show reflect those of the individual speaker and not of any 12-Step Fellowship as a whole. And though we discuss 12-Step recovery and the impact it had in our lives, we do not promote or endorse any 12-Step Anonymous program.